GoForThe2.com. It is week number 6 of the college football season. There are some great matchups from top to bottom in every conference. I think there's going to be some upsets. I can't wait to see how it pans out. I'm going to give you my predictions in a couple of minutes. I just want to remind everybody, this coming Friday, blogtalkradio.com, my co-host and I, former Georgia Bulldog wide receiver Corey Allen, we're going to discuss the Georgia Bulldogs-Tennessee matchup in Knoxville this Saturday. We're going to discuss a couple of key games in the SEC, so you have to check it out. Friday at 6:30 p.m., blogtalkradio.com. Corey Allen and I break down the SEC on the NCAA Weekly Blitz Show. Go to blogtalkradio.com, the NCAA Weekly Blitz Show, 6:30 p.m. Corey Allen and I discuss the Bulldogs and the SEC. You have to check it out. Let's get right into the predictions for this coming weekend. Let's talk about the Pac-12 matchup between undefeated Stanford and the undefeated Washington Huskies. It's a rematch of last year in which Washington got the victory at home in Seattle. Washington has 3 good quality wins on their resume. They knocked off the Boise State Broncos week number 1 at home. Week number 3, they knocked off Illinois on a neutral field site. Illinois is a very solid Big Ten team. They're 3-1 on the year, and they defeated last week at home a Pac-12 opponent in Arizona. They dominated 31-13 victory at home in Seattle. So a very good resume for Washington heading up into this matchup against 5th-ranked Stanford. When you look at the Washington offense, very balanced. Quarterback Keith Price completing over 70% of his passes, 9 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions. He's being protected by an experienced offensive line this year. Last year, Keith Price struggled. He was sacked 33 times last year with a very inexperienced offensive line. This year, that offensive line is a strength, and you're showing what Keith Price can do when you give the senior quarterback time. I'm more impressed, though, with that offensive line in the rushing attack. They're opening up holes for Bishop Sankey, very underrated running back, and that Washington Husky offense is ranked 11th in the nation in rushing offense, averaging 288.8 rushing yards per game. Very underrated running back and rushing attack for Washington. I think they're going to put a lot of pressure on the defensive front for Stanford. When you look at that UW defense, very good in run support, only giving up 132 rushing yards per game. Very solid in pass defense, too, only surrendering 156 yards passing per game. They have a very stout defense in terms of points scored. They're only surrendering 10.8 points per game defensively, and Steve Sarkisian and that defensive staff making the adjustments in 2013, and they have the ability to compete with Stanford in this matchup. I think they have the ability in the secondary to confuse quarterback Kevin Hogan, and I like Washington to pick up the victory on the road in Palo Alto. I think it'll be a hard-fought game, but I like Washington to pick up a 24-21 victory on the road. If Washington wins this ball game, you have to consider Washington as a contender in the Pac-12 along with Oregon. 2 different types of teams, but I think Washington has what it takes to compete for a Pac-12 championship. So we'll see how they make out this week, but I think they get the victory on the road in Stanford. Let's talk about a Big Ten matchup, Nebraska-Illinois. Both teams are 3-1. Nebraska coming off a bye. They might be without starting quarterback Taylor Martinez, who hurt his toe. He's got turf toe. They're going to start either redshirt freshman Tommy Armstrong or a senior Kellogg. They played in the victory against South Dakota State at home 2 weeks ago. Whoever starts is going to have an extra week to prepare it coming off a bye week. I think that's a positive for Nebraska heading up into the matchup with Illinois. Illinois has a very hot quarterback in Nathan Shieldhouse. They're coming off a dominating home victory against the Miami of Ohio Redhawks. They won 50-14 at home in Champaign. But that Illinois defense starting 2 freshman cornerbacks. I like Kenny Bell and the wide receivers of the Cornhuskers to stretch the secondary of Illinois. Illinois is going to be making its first road appearance of the season. They're going to be heading into Lincoln I like Nebraska's chances in this ball game. Amir Abdullah, very underrated back. That offensive line for Nebraska should be able to wear down the Fighting Illini defensive front, and I think Nebraska picks up a dominating 36-13 victory at home in Lincoln. I think Illinois is much improved. They're another year away, but Beckman, their head coach, has the team on the right track. But they're overmatched against the Cornhuskers in this matchup. Let's talk about Penn State, Indiana right now. Penn State is 16-0 over Indiana. Last couple of years, Indiana has played Penn State very tough. When you look at Penn State, they did pick up a dominating victory week 1 over Syracuse in East Rutherford. Week 2, they dominated Eastern Michigan at home. They struggled in both of those matchups early on. They did pick up 2 victories. They did lose to Central Florida in week number 3. They didn't look too good in terms of turnovers and turning the ball over with Christian Hackenberg, their freshman quarterback. Penn State is 3-1, but I'm not sold on the Nittany Lions. For some reason, they're just missing something. I'm not sold on Christian Hackenberg, the freshman quarterback. I know he's having a very good season, but he's very turnover prone early in his career. I think Indiana's passing attack is able to challenge the Penn State secondary, and I think Indiana picks up a stunning 28-25 victory at home. They shock Penn State, and Indiana moves to 3-2 on the season. I'm not sold on the Penn State defense. They lack some depth on the defensive line, and I like Indiana to challenge the secondary. I'm calling for a 28-25 victory by the Hoosiers at home over Penn State. Let's talk about Georgia traveling to Knoxville to take on Tennessee. Georgia coming off a very impressive 44-41 victory over then 6th-ranked LSU. Very emotional victory. This can be a trap game for Georgia. But when you look at this matchup, Tennessee playing very undisciplined football. They have 10 turnovers over the last 3 ball games. I think you're seeing the effects of back-to-back road games 3 weeks ago against Oregon, the following week on the road against Florida. They came back home last week against South Alabama. They had to intercept the ball in the end zone. Otherwise, South Alabama had an opportunity to tie that ball game up in Knoxville last week. And I like the way Georgia's playing. I know they lost Todd Gurley last week. He's questionable with an ankle injury heading up into this matchup. But the passing attack of Aaron Murray, and I like the rushing defense. They held LSU to under 100 yards rushing in Athens last week. That's the strength of the Tennessee Volunteer offense. I like Georgia in this matchup. I think they pick up a dominating victory on the road. I'm calling for a 40-20 Bulldog victory in Knoxville. I think emotionally and physically now a very worn down Tennessee Volunteer defense, and I like Georgia to exploit the holes, calling for a 40-20 victory on the road. I don't see a letdown by the Bulldogs this week in Tennessee. Let's talk about LSU traveling on the road to Starkville. LSU's on the other end of that 44-41 loss in Athens. Very emotional loss on the road to Georgia. Now they have to get back on the road, head to Starkville in a very tough environment in Mississippi State. Mississippi State last year lost a 37-17 ball game on the road in Baton Rouge. It was a little misleading though. LSU was up 30-17 with about a minute and a half left. Mississippi State was on the 5-yard line going in for a potential touchdown. Tyler Russell, the quarterback, then threw a 100-yard interception return. That made the game 37-17. So Mississippi State did compete last year on the road against LSU. They're at home, very emotional environment in Starkville. I think it's going to be a very difficult task for LSU to dominate. I think they pick up the victory, but I don't think it's easy. I think it's a 20-17 LSU victory on the road. Mississippi State has a very good offensive line, very underrated running back in Ladarius Perkins, and the secondary is very underrated as well. They held down a very good, sophisticated passing attack in Oklahoma State week 1. Very impressive in pass defense. I think Mississippi State has what it takes to challenge LSU at home. LSU wins, but it's not easy. 20-17 on the road in Starkville. Let's talk about Vanderbilt right now. At home against undefeated Missouri. In my estimation, Vanderbilt, very underrated team. Austin Carter Samuels, very solid quarterback. Jordan Matthews, a big play wide receiver. When you look at this matchup last year, Vanderbilt was able to get the victory on the road because of the heavy rush attack by the Commodores. They have a very underrated rushing attack this year. Two very good backs in Tate and their other back, Kimbrough. I like the Commodores in this matchup at home against Missouri. I don't like the defensive line of the Tigers. They're a little undersized. I like the Commodores and head coach James Franklin to dominate this game at home. Vanderbilt picks up a hard-fought 28-17 victory over Missouri. I don't think it'll be easy, but Vanderbilt picks up the victory over Missouri this weekend. Last game, Oklahoma at home against a very tough defense in TCU. Oklahoma picked up a dominating 35-21 victory last week in South Bend. When you look at the rushing attack by the Sooners, they're rushing for 256.8 rushing yards per game. Very run-heavy offense. They're going up against a defense in TCU only surrendering 115 rushing yards per game. When you look at TCU's defense, surrendering a lot in the passing attack, they're giving up 238 passing yards per game, but they're very aggressive on the defensive line, led by Devontae Fields. They have 15 sacks through four ball games. I think Blake Bell and that offense are going to have to run early, then use the play-action passing game with Shepard and their wide receivers. I like Oklahoma in this matchup. I think their defense is one of the top-rated defenses in the country. When you look at what Oklahoma was able to do last week on the road in South Bend, I think they created turnovers. They're able to score off their turnovers. And Oklahoma has, in my opinion, one of the best defenses in the country in 2013. They're very physical in run support. They're very physical in the linebacker and secondary in terms of coming up and supporting the run. That's something a year ago they were not very good in. Defensive coordinator Mike Stoops and his brother Bob Stoops making good defensive adjustments in the early part of the 2013 season. I like Oklahoma in this matchup. When you look at Trev Boykin, he's an underrated quarterback. He struggled last year at home, but TCU played Oklahoma very tough. They lost a 24-17 victory last game of the year in the Big 12 at home in Fort Worth. It's a different Oklahoma team this year. Very physical on the offensive line, very physical on the defensive front, and I think that's what wears down the offense and defensive lines of TCU. TCU is a very disciplined team under Gary Patterson, but in my estimation, they don't have enough offensive weapons to compete with the Oklahoma defense. I like Oklahoma to dominate in this matchup. I think they pick up a 35-13 home victory over TCU. Stay with me all season long. I think it's going to be a great weekend of college football. You have to watch it. There's great games from 12 o'clock until midnight. You have to watch them all. College football is the best. Stay with me all season long. I can't wait to give it to you at GoForThe2.com.